Hey everybody, welcome to A Real Point of View. This is Greg Morgan. I'm the real movie guy, and I'm here with one of my co-hosts, the marvelous movie maven herself, Miss Karen D. How you doing, Karen?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Been kind of a tough week, but I made it through and trying to hopefully anticipating another tough week, but I'm going to do what I can to persevere.
Yeah, I had a tough week too, and I also will persevere.
Yes, because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's
Especially
right.
after this raft of movies, we have no excuses.
Indeed, perseverance is the key.
Yeah.
I called this Reflections of Love, Focus Hollywood Reflections of Love, because, we talk about love in a lot of different facets. Most of the time, even here on a real movie, here on a real point of view, excuse me. And I thought taking it from a different perspective would be a fresh new look at love, reflections of love in people who you wouldn't expect to necessarily and stereotypically not receive love like the rest of us. Um, and so I picked three movies that might surprise our viewing audience. The first film is Fundamentals of Caring. The primary star here is Paul Rudd, but the story is much broader than his character in the film. The second movie is Me Before You, with let's see, it's Emily. She's from. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I lost my thought for a moment. Amelia Clark, and then the final film is a film that actually came out in the '70s. The two prior films both came out this year, 2016, but the latter film came out in 1978, and this stars Jane Fonda and John Voight. So, Karen, did you have a chance to review these films before we talk about them?
Yeah, more or less. Did
Well,
you?
yes. The only one I didn't see the total film, although I saw the majority of it, was the Coming Home with John Voight and Jane Fonda. Um, because this was a tough week, ladies and gentlemen, it was a little harder to get to see all the films in their entirety, at least on my end. And but I found myself getting more and more drawn into the Coming Home, and it's a really good determiner if a film can stand the test of time. And in this situation, it does. We're talking about a film that was made in 1978, and it does have great actors in it. It's basically a love triangle in this film. Jane Fonda is married to Bruce Dern's character. Bruce Dern is another star in the film, and she falls for John Voight. In each of these movies, there's special circumstance, special only in the midst of not truly being able to describe it in any other way. Um, in each of these films, we have people romantically inclined and or perceptive into the possibilities of romance. And each one of these people are in a wheelchair. So we don't get a lot of romantic situations, romantic comedies, romantic dramas in a situation where each of the primary characters in the love situation are in a wheelchair. So that's a special factor in these particular films. So did you, why not start with Coming Home? This is basically a film where um, the primary character, Jane Fonda, is Sally Hyde. And Sally is married to Captain Bob Hyde. This is happening during the and Sally's husband is about to go overseas. He's a Marine and he's about to go overseas. And so, she's has instructions from her husband to go live with her mother um, and just, you know, sit out the war while he goes to fight. Doesn't want her to work. um, she's not very liberated in this film early on. And she finds herself compelled to go volunteer at a veterans center. And that's where she meets John Voight's character, which is Luke Martin. So I thought this was a very interesting scenario because I think in this case, um, Sally and Luke actually went to the same high school. And so there was a kind of a crush, I think, that Sally had on Luke while they were in high school. And that probably was part of the impetus to be, for her becoming starstruck with him and his personality. He's a kind of a gruff character early on in the film, but as he gets to know her, um, that gruffness goes away. Um, I thought this was a really good film. I'm not saying that I condone necessarily um, the fact that she was seeing John Voight while her husband was in overseas, but at the same time, it's still a compelling romance of two people who find themselves very not just attracted to each other, but understanding each other. What do you think, Karen? You think that makes for a good love triangle?
Well, I don't know if it makes for good love triangle. I will say that Coming Home has long been one of my favorite films. I remember going to the movies to see it when it came out in 1978. I actually have the original movie poster from this film.
Oh wow!
And I just thought John Voight was amazing in this film. I thought Jane Fonda was amazing, and Bruce Dern was particularly compelling in this movie. I think what's really interesting, I mean, again, it's like it's 1978. The Vietnam War, at this point in time, has it hasn't even been over for 5 years at this point in time. So we don't have the gift of perspective. But this movie was based on a book that Ron Kovacs was in the process of writing. It's based on his experiences. And for those in our viewing audience who don't know, Ron Kovacs is the man who wrote Born on the 4th of July, which eventually became a movie starring Tom Cruise. So that's sort of the genesis of this particular movie. And I think there are just some things going on in this movie. I mean, again, you have to think 1978, that's 48 years ago, almost 50 years ago. And 48 years ago, 1978, no, I'm sorry, 38 years ago. Not 48, oh my God. Okay, so 38 years ago, but this film is almost 40 years old. So think about, I guess you kind of have to just go back in time to where our sensibilities might have been at that time. Feelings about the war were still very vivid and very stark. You know, there were, I mean, people who not only protested our involvement in Vietnam to begin with, but then there were also those people who protested how veterans were treated after they came home, and people who protested that people wanted to go and, quote, serve their country, end quote, by fighting people a world away who had never, ever been involved in an attack on the United States. Mm-hmm. So extremely vivid, stark opinions about this war. And then this country had not even begun to deal with the huge reality of what happened when people came home from the war. Medical science has advanced enough so that people who would have been dead in World War II, the Korean War, World War I, and go just pick a war going back, are now alive. They're being kept alive because medical science has advanced enough to keep them alive, and they might be kept alive forever in a paralyzed state or in a vegetative state, in a mentally, injured state, whereas before there's no question that they would have been dead. So we had not even begun to think about how to deal with these people, these men who were so profoundly scarred from experiences that were in no way prepared for. The jungles of Vietnam were things, I mean, that's not a reality that we as a country had, because we just didn't. I mean, our country doesn't have a strong history of wars being fought on its soil. There's only a couple I can think of: the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Other than that, we go elsewhere. But the only war in advance of the Vietnam War where conditions approached being similar was the Korean War, and that wasn't even considered a war. That was considered a political action. And really, the Vietnam War, there was a long time before there was ever actually a war. It was called a war, technically. So we just didn't know what to do with these men. We still don't know what to do with these men. And we don't know what to do with the families. We don't know how to address this, not completely. And I think it's really interesting. There's this one scene you mentioned that they were that Sally Hyde and Luke Martin were acquaintances in high school. He was like the captain of the football team. He was the it guy. And yeah, she did have a crush. She did have a crush on him, but so did everybody else. So he was like, and so he's the guy who literally has the world on a string, big man on campus. He goes from that to this raging, paraplegic, practically lunatic of a man who is so just consumed with anger that he can barely spit. That change is amazing. I mean, it's just profound. And there's this situation where she meets him, but she bumps into him, and he has a colostomy bag. And she bumps into him, and the urine bag breaks and spills urine everywhere. The fact that something like this is even in a movie, I mean, it's kind of hard. I mean, movies allude to that, but that movie really showed it. Mm-hmm. And there were just, I think this movie tried to very honestly, and I don't know if it was always successful. I mean, if you read, some reviewers thought it was successful, other reviewers didn't. I, for one, thought it was successful. I thought the way in which they tried to deal with just this raging anger for which there was no outlet was very forward-thinking, and the way in which they dealt with the feelings that people have, especially when they don't have the physical capacity to express the feelings in the traditional way that we expect those feelings to be expressed. I think the movie tried to approach that very honestly, and the fact that we even raised the issue was pretty shocking for 1978.
Yeah, so, I think also too, going back to the colostomy bag for just a moment, what I thought was interesting going to her crush on him over all those years, she got a lot of that spilled on her, and it didn't faze her. She was more into who it was and him, and that didn't even sway her. In fact, she went on to say, "Yes, I still want to volunteer here."
Right.
So that was an interesting thing I noticed. But I agree. And one of the things that I noticed throughout the film, we got a lot of information about what else was going on in the world. Just as an example, Kennedy was killed, and it was mentioned in passing in this film. And we saw Bobby Kennedy. I mean, there was different things that kept popping up. And also, too, different music of the times playing throughout the film, adding a little more ambiance to the film. So I agree with you, Karen. I think this is a really good movie. I think people should watch it for its total effect and in trying to understand the things that people go through. The beginning of the film, there's a discussion, not an argument, but a discussion about whether or not someone who had been injured would go back if they had to do it all over again.
Mm-hmm. One man is asked that, and one man says, "Hell yeah, I'll go back. I'd go back." And man, I'm serving my country. And somebody else was like, "You are wackadoo, dude. You've been had."
Right. Actually, a few other people were
Oh,
saying,
right.
right. He was pretty outnumbered. Yet, ironically, he did not fold. His convictions were stern and well, weird and crazy to me, but he stood by his ideology and his thought about it. And he was talking about oppression. And this is what I thought was funny because it's truly, I mean, ironically funny. He says, you know, we should go and help someone in another country that's being oppressed and maybe do something. And one guy says very candidly, yeah, like this country when they made you get into the draft. You
Right.
were forced into the draft. You didn't have to go truly, and you were made to go. Tell me that wasn't another country forcing somebody to do something they didn't want to do. So they
Yep.
talk about a lot of different issues, and it's lightly brought up so you can hear it, so you can understand and know what's going on at the time, other than the relationship between the three primary characters in Jane Fonda, John Voight, and Bruce Dern, and understanding that some of the anger and angst and horrendous fury that was in John Voight in the hospital, so too did Bruce Dern suffer the same thing, only even more mentally in his situation. So we realize that this war, that this action that occurred back then, did uh, mental and physical damage abroad as well as here at home. And as you alluded to here, still happening today.
Well, the conversation that was had amongst the veterans, actually, that was unscripted. That was in that somebody just said let the cameras roll, and the way that the movie was originally planned out, John Voight's character was supposed to join into that argument, but if you look at that montage, he didn't join in because he felt even as an actor, I mean, even trying to be his character would be disrespectful because these were real veterans talking about their experiences. And so out of respect for them and what they'd gone through, he listened. And that was all he did.
And also, if you look very closely in that moment in time, he didn't just listen. You could see the pain on his face too,
Hmm.
just listening to it. And it was almost like it was really hurting him. So I think that played well into the visual of the film.
Right.
So what about the romance of the film? Anything romantically in this essence, even if it's not a positive thing? What do you think about how she felt about him and how she her digression away from Bruce Dern?
Well, again, I mean, this movie was set in 19 this movie was made in 1978, but it was set in 1968.
Mhm.
So the women's liberation was just, it was kind of like a buzzword, but in 1968 it didn't affect the day-to-day lives of most women, and Sally Hyde kind of represented most women. Bruce Dern was this Marine, very conservative, very much in favor of the Vietnam War, very much, ready to go and do his tour of duty. And she basically, I mean, who knows what she really thought? She didn't know what she really thought. She just did what she thought what her husband thought because she was a good wife and she did what good wives do, which is basically be a reflection of the husband. So
Mhm.
it's like he was the sun and she was like a moon kind of circling him.
Right.
Okay, and the only light that came upon her was the light reflected from him. So that was how, and it's sort of like, okay, he didn't want her to work, so she didn't work, but she's bored.
Right.
So pretty much out of desperation, she's like, well, what can I do? It's not going to like insult my husband's wishes because I'm, after all, reflecting on him. Well, I think, and her friend, I mean, she doesn't think of this herself. Her friend Vi comes along and says, well, hey, why don't you work at the Veterans Hospital? And she thinks about it and she's like, well, yeah, that would be a good thing. But why is this a good thing? Because it's volunteer work, so she's not taking some paid job away from some, soldier who's trying to come back from the war. she's working with veterans, so she's supporting. It's a way of supporting her husband while he's absent because he's a veteran. He'll be a veteran when he comes back. He was a veteran when he went. And she's helping people who need her, and women are traditionally the caretakers. They care for the men. So this is perfect. It's the perfect solution because she still maintains her role, but she gets to do something with her days. She doesn't know what she's bargaining for when she meets up with Luke. And Luke was like her husband before he went. And then his just out of control anger is just generated by him just feeling like he'd been totally like he'd been totally screwed over by the country that he loved, but did not love him back because it put him in the worst possible situation and left him a broken man. At the same time, when Luke and Sally meet, it's like they're meeting on far more equal terms than Sally and Bob when they get together. I mean, Luke actually shows some interest in her as a person. What does she like? What does she want? Who is she? And I don't know that she has all that much to say about it because she spent so much time trying to reflect her husband. I don't know that she knows who she is. But she feels like with Luke, she gets a chance to at least begin to find out. And that's something that would never happen with Bob. So I'm like, I mean, I understand where the love came from. You can't, I don't care what papers say, you can't dictate. You love who you love. At the end of the day, the papers can say what they want. And even if you stay with that person, what does that mean if you don't love them? That doesn't mean anything. It's a shell. It just becomes a shell of a relationship at that point, in my opinion. So you gravitate toward the person who, without so much judgment, but with with care, with interest and love, wants to help you become you and is interested in you, not turning you into some caricature of yourself, but actually wants that person to be who she is. And she wanted Luke to be who he was. Like she wasn't taking care of him because she's like, wow, if I do a really good job, he'll walk again. No. Or gee, if I'm really careful, and I really care and blah blah blah, then then I can just keep like caring for him and everything will be fine. That wasn't it either. They had a vibrant relationship. Because she thought he was still a person, even though the world around them was saying he was half a man. Right. She saw him as a whole man. Right. That's huge. And Bruce Dern was was ambulatory. He could walk, but he wasn't a whole man. No. He was. I mean, I think the juxtaposition between those two characters is Bruce Dern, who was wrapped in the flag and wrapped in his uniform, was still far more crippled, even though he wasn't physically limited in mobility. He was far more crippled in far more profound ways than Jon Voight was, right, even though he was physically crippled.
Right, and that's the difference in the perception, and that's one of the reasons why I picked the film, because again, you're looking at two different people who definitely have some issues, but the mental issue was so crippling for Bruce Dern's character that it was hard. You couldn't be around him.
Right.
It was just a form of debilitation. You just couldn't be around him. And yet Jon Voight, after a while, understood his situation and was gradually getting used to the physicality of it. But with her attentions, with her just being herself around him, it mentally took a load off of him. It made him feel, I.e., that whole person again. even though it wasn't physical. So yeah, yeah, love can do that sometimes. So why don't we go ahead and talk about another film, Karen? Um, I was looking at this film. I've seen a lot of trailers about it, and this is the film Me Before You with Sam Claflin and Amelia Clark. Um, this is a lot of British people.
It's basically a reunion of the cast from Game of Thrones.
And
I mean, the
yeah,
only
yeah,
person
pretty
missing
much.
was the Tyrrell Lannister. I expected him to see him walking through there any second.
Yeah, there's a very interesting
Every single
father
major person, every single major cast member had some sort of role on Game of Thrones.
at some point, correct? That's the funny part. But anyway, with that being said, um, we have a situation where this young woman is um, definitely a family team member. She does everything she can to try to help her family when her father loses his job. And so she does takes odd jobs, anything she can find, along with her sister and mother, try to find something so that they can, keep the family going. But until Dad can find a job that he can, get his teeth into. So, with that being said, she finds a situation where the rich family in the town, because it's obviously a relatively small town retrospectively. Now, the rich family in town has a son who has a terrible accident, and this accident makes him unable to walk and use his limbs. Um, Pretty much, his head moves, and that's pretty much it in this film. But in the sense of he was a vibrant guy, he's a climber, he was very active, he was very um, energetic until he has this accident, which um, he gets hit by a motorcycle, if I remember correctly.
While he was walking, he
While he
was
was walking.
talking on his cell phone, and this motorcycle comes from out of nowhere and must have ridden all over him because, yeah, it just
Yeah,
totally
just uh, no.
breaks him up into a million pieces practically.
So in this film, we have uh, a love that starts off as a job, then becomes a interesting acquaintanceship, then the friendship, then you can see the essence of love between these two people. But is the word? Am I using this word right, Karen? Unrequited love? Is that how you say it?
That's how you say it, but I don't know where that applies
Well,
in
what did
this
you think
movie.
about the film?
Well, I certainly don't think there was unrequited love between the two main characters. If there was unrequited love, it was between her character, Amelia, and of course I've just forgotten the names of the characters again.
She's Lou.
She's Lou, and he's
Well,
Will.
yeah.
Okay. Well, Lou has a boyfriend who is like this avid runner and biker, and he's doing like all of these sort of like he's practically a decathlete, so doing all of these things that that Will used to do. And Will probably did them even way more. I mean, he was like an extreme sports enthusiast. Also, in his own right, he was a millionaire because he was a .com. He was like a .com investor and a brilliant investor. So he made a lot of money. The
Mhm.
family lived in a castle.
Yep.
Okay, so they were like obscenely wealthy, all of them,
Mhm.
and so it. And the other thing to remember is that the beginning of the film, you see him with a blonde woman. Well, that's his fiance,
Mhm.
and they have this idyllic existence.
Mhm.
And he's getting ready to go to work, and he's walking while distracted, and the motorcycle was God knows he was probably on a cell phone too. And they plow into each other, and then years later, or not years later, I guess like a year later or so, he's, like you said, a quadriplegic, and his life is completely changed, and she ends up taking care of him. But I think they mutually loved each other. There wasn't unrequited at all.
Yeah, I was asking if I was using the term correct, because the whole point of me talking about the films is about their romance. So
Oh,
I
oh,
was
oh,
not
oh.
using it correctly.
Oh,
That's
oh,
why I was
oh,
asking.
oh. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I thought you were saying that the love wasn't required. I'm like,
And
no, I know they definitely loved
I
each
was
other.
trying to make sure if I understood the term correctly,
It
which
was
was
requited love.
requited is what I meant to say.
Yeah, it was definitely requited love. But I mean, yeah, if you're going to ask me what I think about this film, I did not intend to watch the whole film because I was also trying to watch get the fundamentals of caring fit in there too. But I ended up watching the whole film because I really liked this film. I thought this film was well done. I mean, this film is made, it's a British film, it's made with British sensibilities. And I have to say that I think the Brits, I mean, they get a lot of teasing over, keeping a stiff upper lip and, not letting the feelings show and being, British reserve and all this other stuff. But there's some of the films that I've seen that have come from British studios that are really well done films because the people involved in making those films have a very deft hand at addressing these feelings, and I don't know how they do it because I think American films aren't nearly as good in that regard, or at least I can't think of any that I've seen lately that are in that regard. Me Before You kind of reminded me a little bit of My Left Foot, which is another British film. And it also reminded me of, there was another film that it kind of reminded me, it reminded me of an American film that was very well done, but preceded it decades before, called Whose Life Is It Anyway?
Mm-hmm.
It's a film starring Richard Dreyfuss, and very similar in that Richard Dreyfuss was a rich young, and he was a very young man when he did this film. This film came out in the 70s. He was a rich young man, a complete and total jerk. I mean, they had a picture of him next to jerk in the dictionary. And he was riding around in his sports car and smashed into a semi-trailer. And but for the miracle, quote unquote, of modern medicine, he would have been decapitated and dead. Instead, he ends up as a quadriplegic. And this film, Me Before You, deals with the issues of assisted suicide and quality of life, whether to do assisted suicide or not, what is a good life, what can you do when your life so profoundly changes, and the person that you're so invested in this person that you used to be, do you really want to continue living as this other person, this completely new reality that is never going to change? And Whose Life Is It Anyway dealt with the same kinds of things. And it was a very well done movie, but just heart-wrenching. Oh God, it was really.
This one too.
And this one too. It was hard to watch.
It was.
But it did have elements of comedy, not too dissimilar from Whose Life Is It Anyway, too. There were a lot of comedic elements in that film which were really needed. And in this film, too, the way that he teases her, and then I love the scene where this is like a third of the way through the movie, and the family decides to have a birthday party for her. And she invites him, but also invites her erstwhile boyfriend. And her boyfriend's a tool. I mean, you know that from the very beginning. He's just he's like such an idiot. It's like, what are you doing with him to begin with?
Right.
She invites.
Too. Sorry.
She invites her idiot boyfriend and her parents, and I think her sister wasn't there, but another family member or something like that. So anyway, this small group of people, and they bring her presents, and her mother, I think it's her grandfather, no, her grandfather's there. So her grandfather, remember, they can't afford very much because she's the only one working. The father hasn't found a job and all this other stuff. So the grandfather made like a scrapbook of pictures from her childhood and stuff like that and gave that to her. And he made it himself. And the mother helped. So that was really touching. It was very sweet, and she really liked that present. Then the boyfriend says, hey, well, I've got a present too for you, and, you really need to open up my present. This is awesome. So she's like, okay, great. I can't wait to see what this is. And she opens up the present, and the present is a necklace that has Paul. It's like a locket that says Paul, because that's his name. And I guess she's supposed to wear this, and she's like, wow. I can't quite begin to tell you how much this doesn't mean to me, because it's not like I'm your property or your cow. So why would I go around wearing a bell with Paul written in it? Anyway, so she's like, okay, this is great. Let's move on. Well, then Will's like, I brought a present too. He kind of says it really shy. Well, I brought a present too, and she wasn't expecting that he would do that. And she's like, oh, wow, okay. And he's like, it's in my bag. So and it's on the back of the wheelchair. So she goes there and she pulls out the box and opens it up. Well, it's a pair of bumblebee stockings. I mean, like the loudest bumblebee, like yellow and black stripes, like literally bumblebee. Because she's a really bizarro dresser, and if their family hadn't had so many problems, she probably would have gone to design school, and she would have fit right in fashion design school. And she'd be showing on the runways of Paris or Milan or whatever. But she can't, and she dresses herself, she uses herself as her palette, and she puts together some crazy combinations, but somehow on her they work. And she tells him in an earlier conversation about how she had some like pair of crazy yellow and black stockings, and something happened to them, she didn't have them anymore, and she wished she had them or whatever. But they were just awesome. So that's what he gave her. And she was so excited. She was like, oh my God, this is like the best present ever. And where did you find them? How could that, these aren't even available anymore, and yet you found them, blah, blah. And he mentioned something about how he found them. She's like, I got to go try these on. And then Paul, the boyfriend's like, whoa, wait, what am I, chopped liver? And everybody's like, yes, that's exactly what you are. You are chopped liver.
They don't say it.
What? Say that again?
I said they don't say it out loud, but boy, the looks on their face.
Yeah.
It showed.
Right. So that's like a really funny moment, and there's another funny moment when his fiance got married to another guy, his best friend, as it turned out. And there was this really, I like the interplay between the awkward moments and the kind of the funny moments and the really, poignant moments. But the fiance and the best friend come to visit Will, and they're like, the way in which they act, they're so arrogant and so almost snide. It's like, well, okay, hey, we're doing you a favor by coming to visit you, and yeah, it might be kind of uncomfortable that we're the ones getting married instead of me marrying you, because I was supposed to marry you, but I kind of fell in love with your best friend because I just didn't see a future for us with you in that condition. But I don't know why you're sweating us so much, you're throwing so much shade on us, and it's like, no. They're both, he especially, the best friend especially, was a jerk, but so was she. Yeah. They both are. And so, anyway, he decides to go to the wedding. Why, I don't know. But he decides to go to the wedding, and he asked her to go with him. And, while like the fiance and the best friend are probably, they're wrapped up in their own little world, but then, they deign to look over at him from time to time, or they say something to them or whatever. But Lou just decides, well, we're going to have fun, take me dancing, you've got a motorized wheelchair there, let's tool around the dance floor, it'll be great. And they did. And they just had a great time, and she looked really pretty, and he looked really great. He was all dressed up. By then, he was a lot better groomed than he was in the beginning of the movie. So yeah, it was. She just had like all of this joie de vivre, really, just this light and this joy, and he sorely needed that, but she also needed somebody who didn't just think of her as the ditzy girl who just can't figure out what to do with her life. He didn't think, I mean, she's enormously compassionate and very smart, and I mean, just emotionally extremely intelligent, far more intelligent than some of the other people. Certainly, like the fiance and the best friend. And she's a caring person. I mean, she didn't have to stay and help her family. I mean, she had a conversation with the sister. The sister's like, I can't do this anymore. I gotta go. But Lou wasn't going. She wasn't going to leave her family.
Right. Not in the dire straits that they were in.
Right.
Because I think her sister went off to college, so
right.
left there to hold the fort down. They were both holding it down before the sister left.
Right.
But she just couldn't do it anymore and wanted to get on with her life.
Right.
And so
which makes sense, but I guess I'm just pointing out that not that her sister shouldn't have done that. Her sister had every right to do that, and she probably stayed longer than she should have. But I guess I'm saying that Lou was just willing to put them before her even more so by saying, okay, I'm not going to go. I'm just not going to go. I will continue to put my own life and feel like the rest of you all are back on solid ground. And there's no time limit to that. Whatever it takes, I will do.
hey, there was a technical glitch. Are you back?
Yes, well, yes. I thought there was a technical glitch on your end. I was wondering if you were back. You froze.
Yeah, that's what I got on my end. So, bottom line is, these two had a very, very good connection with each other. And we won't give you the total essence of everything that happens in the film, but throughout the good and the bad times, their feelings for each other just blossomed and grew stronger. It was a very strong bond. And although the ending, although a lot of the film is hard to watch, ultimately it's a really good film. So you're beckoned to see the whole thing.
Right.
So definitely like that one. Now, the last movie that we're going to discuss is The Fundamentals of Caring. Now, the primary star in this particular film is Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd, people probably know him he's in a lot of comedic roles in many films. In fact, more recently, he's played a superhero. He's also an Ant-Man. But there seems to always typically be some type of comic relief when Paul Rudd is involved. Even in a dramatic film, there's a little bit of whimsy at times. And this film's no different. There's a little whimsy here, but less of it virtually than we know to be Paul Rudd in many films. But this film also involves a situation where we have another quadriplegic. No, that's not right in this one.
No, he wasn't. He was paraplegic.
He was a paraplegic, thank you, in this particular film. And so Ben has decided to become a caregiver he's at his wit's end because he just doesn't know what to do with his life because of a tragedy in his life. So
He's an author. He'd written books that no one had ever heard of, and he's like you said, in desperate straits. So he goes to caregiving class and trains to become a caregiver.
right, and so he's fortunately, and I mean truly mean fortunately, employed to take care of a young man named Trevor, who is witty, um, a little bit of a jerk early on, um,
And middle on.
and later on, um, but at some point you gravitate toward liking him a little bit, especially toward the middle to the end of the film, and so um, they just to speed it up a little bit, they come across this young woman. Her name is Dot, and she's played by Selena Gomez. And Trevor is played by Craig Roberts. I thought Trevor's character was interesting. Um, he brought out a lot of things. So Paul Rudd was starting to get off of his own case because Paul Rudd was just a very sad guy early on in this film. And his connection with Trevor comes to him playing against Trevor's snideness and crassness throughout the film. And it starts to get to be a point where now Paul Rudd is feeling like it's a game. And so when Trevor was playing games with him early on, now he's playing games with Trevor back. And instead of Trevor getting really upset, Trevor's thinking that this is it's like a challenge. And so their friendship starts to grow because now they're challenging each other. And what it does for Trevor, it gets his mind off of how he feels because he's sad too.
Right.
And for Paul, it brings Paul out of his rut. And he becomes a little bit happier, a little bit more giving, more ideas. And his mental capacity starts to flow again like it had prior to his tragedy. So, they happen upon this girl, and Trevor's looking at this girl like, oh, wow. Like, wow. Like, wow. And instead of treating him, because they end up interacting with her, instead of treating him and like a person who can't be touched, a person who can't truly be talked to, a person who can't be, because they're too fragile, you don't see any of that with her. In fact, she's almost abrasive.
She has no filter.
Yeah, she's like, and yet that intrigues Trevor even more. And the relationship between the two, especially as the movie continues on and they're in each other's presence even more, you find that there's a connection that you really didn't think was going to happen. I didn't initially. And then as the movie goes on, and then the latter part of the film with the two of them, it's like they have to part ways. And man, it was like a tearjerker for a minute. What you think?
I didn't know they parted ways.
Spoiler alert! Oh,
yeah.
You're supposed to give the spoiler alert first, not after you've done it.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Next time, I'll try to remember that. Each time I've done that, I haven't remembered, but I'll try the next time. Spoiler alert.
Boy, you sure have no problem stopping that cow after it's left the barn.
That's what a bell's for.
That's what the bell is for.
It's supposed to stop the cow, but it keeps going. You go ding, 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 ding. Okay.
Yeah. I have not been able to see the film. I've read about the film, but I do like the film. And I guess what I will, again, I think there's some British sensibilities in this film because I don't know if it's a British film, but they definitely have British actors in it. And
Trevor's mom, for example.
Right. And so you have this sort of, again, this very deft touch with a sensitive subject. And the deftness doesn't come from walking on eggshells. The deftness comes from knowing when to pile on and when to back off. And that's a far more difficult proposition, especially for a movie. And I also have to give a tip of my hat to Paul Rudd, because he's a very multi-layered actor. And while he's became known in the business as a comedian and as a comedic actor, he's really good in these sort of, dramatic or tragicomic type roles where you need somebody who's not trying to make you laugh, but somebody who can he understands the irony of of a situation, and he also can allow himself to be vulnerable when the situation calls for it. And when you're trying to get people to laugh, it's really hard to shift into, oh my God, I've been wounded. It's really hard to shift into that. But because he never goes he never plays things just for laughs.
Right.
He is in the situation. He's the guy in the situation, and the comedy comes because he's telling the truth about the situation. I'm sorry, the truth is that it's funny. That's where it comes from, and that's a much more honest place. So I really, he's a really good actor, I think.
I think so too, and the different movies that he's been. Some of the movies, it's hard for me to watch them because I think they're just going to be too silly. And not that I'm against comedy.
Yeah, like the frat boy movies that he's done,
or even a lot of movies with Will Ferrell.
Oh yeah.
I like Will Ferrell. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I think sometimes it's just too over the top.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Paul Rudd, as you were stating, he has a different way of how he approaches funny and how he laughs through funny. He has great expression, and he almost seems shocked at the funny. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it sometimes even funnier because it's almost like, well, he didn't understand or know either. It's like, whoa. So for him to be in a more dramatic role that does have moments of whimsy, but it's moments of whimsy that would be very typical in humanity, not overly funny, but whimsical things happen because they're just living their lives, but they're also getting to understand each other a little bit more. And
there's a great
really good at that.
There's a great scene when the whole point, the whole big thrust of the movie is that this guy Trevor doesn't have that long to live. He's diagnosed with the disease, and early in the movie there's an allusion. I think the mother or somebody says that he would at most has 7 to 10 years to live. He's probably like 13 or 14. Or maybe 15. No, I say it must have been like 16 or 17.
I think he's a teenager, like 15.
Well into the teens, so 16 or 17 at this point in time. But he only has, with this particular disease, it's a type of dystrophy. It's not muscular dystrophy, but it's some other type of dystrophy, like far more profound in terms of its effect. Yes, progressed in terms of its effects, and so he probably will die within 10 years. So that's sort of like the pathos that kind of overarches the beginning of the film. But but he, like you said, he likes to tweak Paul, the character that Paul Rudd's playing. He likes to really just get the knife and just stick it in, because he doesn't want to be the object of pity, and he's like, I mean, he's got a personality, so So there's this. So, but at the same time, he's also scared, So he's got this very regimented life, and at one point, Paul's like, "Well, don't you want to get out and see some of the stuff you keep watching?" And he's like, "No." Well, why not? I don't need to see it. Oh, well, that's because you're scared. But we should take a road trip. What? Well, somehow he talks him into taking a road trip because he plays against. He knew that Trevor would sort of say, "I'm not doing this," and so Paul's like, "Oh, well, it was my idea, but he doesn't want to do it." And then Trevor's like, "Well, I kind of want to do it." "Well, I don't think he should do it." Oh, but no, I actually think it would be good. And the mother's like, I really don't think you should do this. And Trevor's like, well, yeah, I kind of would like to. So as it turns out, he goes on this road trip. But the big fear in the road trip is that somehow, he has to wear a CPAP machine, which is a really critical breathing machine. And if it's not working right, you could die, literally die. It's not just oxygen, it's a breathing machine. So he's got to take the CPAP machine, and there are this is accoutrement of all this other stuff that he's got to take. So they get all that in the van, and off they go. Well, during the trip, Paul Rudd's character says to Trevor, well, why don't you try a Slim Jim? It's like beef jerky, right? Why don't you try Slim Jim? And Trevor, again, very regimented. He likes 2 waffles and sausage every day for breakfast. That's the only thing he will eat. That's his thing. And all the other food, it's like it's very specific at very specific times. If it doesn't happen when it's supposed to happen, he could have a panic attack. That's the other big threat. So Paul's character is like, oh, come on, have a Slim Jim or a Slim James. Would you like a James? You're British, so give James a little bite of the James. Why don't you do that? And Trevor's like, oh, please. So then he finally says, after they meet up with Celine and he's traumatized by that, so in desperation he decides to eat the Slim Jim, and he starts and Paul Rudd's like, yeah, you've done that way too many times. Don't even go there. Yeah, right, whatever. But the veins in his neck are starting to bulge out, and he started to turn different colors, and Paul Rudd's like, oh, my God, he's really choking because I gave him beef jerky. That's probably too, oh, my God. So he switches over, runs over to the other side. Oh my God! Okay, a CPR or something, Heimlich. I've got to do something. And then he just starts laughing. Trevor just starts cracking up, and he's like, "Don't ever do that to me again! You scare the crap out of me." It was hilarious. Cause I'm like, because it was hilarious. It's like, I think he was. I thought, oh, of course he's joking. It's like he might not be joking. He might. Because actually, jerky, that's not the easiest thing to chew. And you're talking about somebody who needs to wear a CPAP machine. This could happen. So I just thought that was a great portion of the movie. It just cracked me up.
Well, with that being said, there's another part in the movie where they're in the hotel room, and it has to do with the CPAP machine. And so Trevor's about to go to bed, and he says, well, you got the machine? And he goes, yeah, it's right over. And Paul Rudd's character is like, wait a minute, did you? You put it in the bag. I put it in the bag, didn't I? He goes, well, you can't find it? He goes, I don't. Oh my God, where? And so Trevor's getting anxious now, and he's about to go off his rocky start. He's like,
right, it's about to have a panic attack.
He's like, where is it? What? You gotta have it. I can't live without. He goes, oh, here it is. He's like, oh.
Booyah.
He's like, oh. And they do this to each other throughout the whole film. It's just hilarious.
But it's hilarious. It really is.
It is hilarious. But it just goes to show you the bond that they're creating over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself is their, what's the word? Their bromance between the 2 guys. And Dot's character comes in and kind of breaks it up. And it's so funny because she's just as rude to one as she is to the other.
Well, like we said, she has no filter. None
whatsoever. But I really enjoyed this film from beginning to end. And love the ending. Lately I've seen a lot of movies where the ending, the majority of the film is actually pretty good. But the ending sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired. Either it's not complete or, now I don't mind the films where it seems like there might be a sequel, so it's not required to be complete. But other films, it's the end, that's it, and they're not doing anything else. And yet, sadly, it doesn't feel like the end, or it's an end that doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not that film. This film makes sense from beginning to end. And I truly enjoy this film.
It's very well
One
done.
of my
I mean,
favorite films.
but it's really I think it's really because of Paul Rudd and the supporting cast too. I mean, the guy who plays Trevor, Craig Roberts,
Yeah,
really good.
yeah,
You know, Selena Gomez was
she did
really
a
good.
good
I
job.
expected her to be a real sort of like, oh my God, she's probably going to ruin this movie, but she didn't.
No,
She did exactly what she was supposed to do. And then, you know, Paul Rudd, of course, and you know, it's just it's a little quirky, but it's a good movie to watch, and it's sort of like, you know, what does it really mean to care about somebody?
right.
You
And
know.
it's truly caring in many, many, many aspects. We're talking about levels of Paul Rudd's acting ability. There's a levels of caring in this film. And ironically, one of the biggest caring moments had nothing to do with any of the three of them.
Okay.
They pick up someone else in the vehicle when they're
Oh.
going on the road, and their combined caring helps facilitate for this person that they pick up in the van. And it's very interesting how the caring just gets spread out among the four people
Mhm. It gets paid forward and around.
and around, correct?
And there's another great moment in the movie when on this road trip, one of the things that that Trevor wanted is just fascinated by is the big cow, the giant cow. And so they go to some place outside of Seattle where you're supposed to see this giant cow. And so they go in, and the proprietor says, "Oh well, you know, I'm sorry, you know, the cow's upstairs." And Paul Rudd, who plays Ben Benjamin, Ben is like, "Yeah, and he's like, well, the cow's upstairs, and you know,
It's not wheelchair
we can't,
accessible.
there's no wheelchair access." And Ben, you know, Ben just does a really nice job of behaving indignantly. Oh, well, you know, you're completely violating the ADA, and you know, what do you mean you know, we can't go up there? So you're saying that somebody who's in a wheelchair can't get to see the big cow, but everybody who's walking around can see the big cow? Well, I'm just going to call, you know, I'm going to call so and so who will bring a lot of television cameras, and you can just explain why you're keeping a poor teenage child who only wants to see the big cow from seeing the big cow. Have fun explaining that. So, and he's like, okay, the phone's ringing. The guy's like, all right, I give up. We'll figure out a way, you know,
They
because
literally
Ben's like,
carry him up the stairs.
it's your problem. You need to figure out how to get him to see the cow. And they're like, well, okay. So I mean, it's pushing, and you see
They
like
literally carry him up the stairs.
three grown men trying to get this wheelchair up this really narrow plank of stairs, and just sweating and breathing heavy and all this other stuff. And so, and they get up, they get the wheelchair upstairs, and they're both standing there looking at
The big
a
cow.
big cow, and that's all it is. It's
A
a
stuffed
big cow.
cow
It's a huge stuffed cow in a room where
by
there's some
itself,
hay,
literally.
and it's only by itself, and there aren't any other. It's just like the hay on the floor and the cow, and that's it. And the guy said, well, you know, it's pretty much just a cow. and, and Ben's like, that's what you say, but we came all the way to see the cow, and I think we should be able to see the cow, you know. And he's like, yeah, it really is just a cow. You're not missing it. He's like, I've got a postcard with the cow. Why don't you just take the postcard? It'll be because we didn't come here to see a picture of the cow. I can see that. We can see that on television. We can see that in a picture book. We came to see the cow in person. We need to see the cow right now.
So they're finally upstairs, and Ben looks at Trevor and goes, "So, you good?" He goes, "Yeah."
Yeah. Right, because yeah,
So they got to take it down
move
the
along.
stairs.
Literally nothing to see here. There's literally nothing to see.
Even I was watching. I was so disappointed myself.
I'm like, the cow?
I'm
Really?
like,
I'm
okay.
like, kid, you need to broaden your horizons on what's worth seeing. Well, then the other thing was that he wanted to see the big, what was it called? The big ditch or the
The
big,
ditch, the big hole.
yes, the big
It was
hole.
a big hole.
It was a big hole. So I just found this kind of funny, and I don't know if they meant this ironically, but but his mother was saying at one point, I don't see what the bloody big deal is about looking at just like a big hole in the ground. And I'm thinking to myself, well, we have a big hole in the ground called the Grand Canyon, and it draws millions of people from all across the earth who are completely overwhelmed by the majesty of its beauty. And you can add me to that. I adored the Grand Canyon. I would love to go back, but walking on the Grand Canyon, I was completely amazed. I'm like, no, there's definitely a way to be just like mesmerized by just a big hole in the ground. That's
I
why they
lived,
called it the Grand Canyon.
I lived in Arizona, and yes, I went to the Grand Canyon, and I had a wonderful time. It was amazing. I didn't think you don't think it's going to be as amazing as it is, and it is a wonder of nature. And and what I thought was crazy, it has this uh, I don't know how else to call it, this part of the canyon that goes out, and you can look over and see everything over, and there's no guardrail.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just
I
that
never saw a
wide,
guardrail
it was
over.
just a wide area, but clearly you get too close to that edge, you could fall into your death.
And people have.
And I know, and the irony is that with all that has had, and it is people are just amaze me. With all that has occurred, people still get too close to that edge. I walked down the middle and I stayed in the middle. And Lynette, my wife, laughed at me because she's like, "Oh, come on, be a little bit, more risky." I'm like, "No." Because people have, because also too at the edges, it's not a true edge; it's rounded, so
Well,
you
there's a
can
lot of gravel. You can slip on
you can
that
easily
gravel and
slip.
go
That's right.
toppling over. And well, I did walk close to the edge, but
Hey, you're one of those people.
yes, I'm one of those people. Well, I didn't walk right up to the edge. I was probably, I would say I had stayed about 2 feet back, but I wanted to be able to look over and see what was down there. So yes, I did that.
Well, fortunately for me, and I know we're segueing a little bit here. Fortunately for me, I have a friend who at the time was a chef, a pastry chef at one of the hotels at the Grand Canyon. And she actually had these tickets for a plane ride to go across the Grand Canyon. And she was so kind to Lynette and I. She gave us the ability to get in the plane, and we flew across the Grand Canyon. And that
Oh,
was wonderful
nice.
too. That was wonderful too.
Yeah, that must have been just stunning.
It was. And
But
so,
anyway, all that to say, there's a reason why people want to see a big hole in the ground. So.
right. Thank you for bringing us back here. Kind of like The Sopranos. They tried to get me out and they pulled me back in. So, so yeah, um, yeah, and that big hole is very, 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 very important to this movie. So, if you get a chance to see it, any of these three movies, I think, is good enough to warrant you paying attention to not just what's going on in the film, but you need to get out there to see it. And if you can't get out to see it, I think now none of them are in theaters now anymore. So
No,
you could either
but the
stream
fundamentals
it
of
or
care
DVDs or
Fundamentals of Caring is available on Netflix if you have a Netflix membership.
yeah. So stream it, watch it. Um, I think actually Coming Home is on YouTube, so you can see
Okay, yeah,
that
it's not
too.
on Netflix, but I think you said it was on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, yeah. So there's availabilities to see these films, and they're just really good, all three of them.
And I think all of these movies are hard to watch, or at least for me personally, they're just very hard to watch. I can't say that this was like the most enjoyable assignment from a movie critic standpoint I've had because these movies are hard to watch. And I was thinking about that this morning. What is it? Why is this just not something that I was really looking forward to? And it's because for me when I see movies about people who are living with disabilities like that. They're perfectly nice people, and yet they're dealing with this, and you can't help wonder why. Well, why do you deserve to be walking around? And I'm speaking for myself, not for anybody else. Why do I deserve to be walking around on 2 feet, or why should my 2 arms work, or my eyes, or whatever, when this perfectly nice person doesn't have that? Or why should I have a long life without any problems when these people are dealing with amazingly profound problems? And it just kind of, it makes me feel unworthy. And it's hard to watch a movie when you're kind of, and of course, you know, it's like you see movies like that, and then you realize you have absolutely no right to complain about anything whatsoever.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, being human, you know, I do, you know, I still think, you know, not everything's perfect, but after seeing this movie, it's like, well, how could I say that? So that just makes these movies very hard to watch. But
and I knew that was going to be part of the case because it was hard for me to watch. But at the same time, I thought, you know, what is our humanity? It encompasses all these things, not just
right,
things that we think are what we would think as atypical things. So
right,
I thought too, here's a situation where most people, for whatever reasons, typically, stereotypically, pity people who seem to have less, seem to not be in accordance with what you or me or other people think should be. And yet,
right,
in many cases, they're more human than a lot of people, and a lot more caring, and a lot more loving, and a lot more to them than what meets the eye. And you know, this is one of those situations where your eyes lie, because these are full people who have, in many cases, you know, wonderful lives because this is their life. But
right.
I wanted to show them in situations where romance was a part of that life, where most people don't think it is.
And I guess the other thing these movies point up is just how fragile, whatever you know, say you are living just this amazing life, you know, where you have the best of everything. There aren't any guarantees. It can be taken away in the blink of an eye. Like, you know,
Right. Well,
in Me Before You, Will was living this perfect life. He was doing everything he wanted to do, and he achieved all these things. And it wasn't that he'd done everything he wanted to do. There were still things he wanted to do. And in 1 second, because of a careless mistake, and that's all it can take. It's like 1 second of careless mistake, then his life changed completely. If he hadn't been on his phone, he probably would have seen the motorcycle coming because he walked right out into the street. If he hadn't been on his phone, he probably would have seen the motorcycle coming, and then he would have gone on to living the life that he imagined in his mind that he was going to continue to live.
mhm.
Um, uh, so, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, you see movies about people who are, you know, diagnosed like Trevor was in The Fundamentals of Caring, diagnosed with a disease that removes mobility and creates profound health issues, or you've got something like an accident that happened to Will. But one turn of a head, you know, you're in the car, you go to look at the radio, and all of a sudden, you know, there's a car crash or whatever. Or like Whose Life Is It Anyway with Richard Dreyfuss. He was driving along, and he was probably driving too fast, but he didn't break any other laws besides that. This truck comes out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, in that split second, whatever he thought his life was has now been completely upended. And I guess being reminded that that possibility exists for all of us is also hard to, you know, contemplate as you watch these films. But you can't, for me, I can't help but think about that as I watch these films. They cause you to think about your own mortality, but not just your mortality, the fragility of what you call your life, and
Right.
what you've planned your life to be, and what you think your life will continue to be. You expect to get up tomorrow, and you expect to walk and talk and, you know,
Yeah.
see and hear and
Everything.
chew and do all this, you know, go to work, whatever, or not go to work, or there are these expectations that just fill out what we call life. And when the very foundation of that is taken away, it just brings up challenges that are extremely difficult to contemplate, and let alone actually live. For me, that's what goes through my mind, which is why I wasn't at all excited about this particular assignment. But it was good. I mean, it's about as exciting as, eating, I don't know, what's a vegetable that I hate? I know, lima beans. But they certainly have their nutritional value. So yes, I'm glad we did it.
Oh, lima beans.
Yeah, I really hate lima beans.
Same thing with me for beets. I can't do beets.
What?
Beets. I can't do beets. It just.
Oh, please, there's a picture of me next to can't do beets in the dictionary.
And in the far distance, there's this guy back there going, "Don't do it." That's me. Don't do it. Well, no beets or lima beans in these films, ladies and gentlemen. These are bona fide A1 Class A films. You should try to watch them all. So again, we have Fundamentals of Caring, we have Me Before You, and Coming Home.
Yes.
And definitely worth watching. And both Karen and I have Coming Home in our library. So very, very good film. Well, thanks again for hanging out with us here on A Real Point of View. And next week, hopefully, we'll have something else that would be really cool to talk about and give you some insights into a few more films. If you get a chance, um, you know, invite a friend over or share it with your family. These are important films to watch and important films to get information and ideas from. So, but thanks again for watching, and we'll be back with another episode again of A Real Point of View. Any final words before we get out of here, Karen?
No, it was great to be on the show with you, Greg. Thank you for coming up with these films, and yeah, it was good to talk about this.
Sweet. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, have a good night. Watch these films if you get an opportunity. Really important, and you'd be surprised how even your life will be changed, because they changed my life a little bit. One of the cool things about film is education. So here's a way to educate and have fun at the same time. Take care, everybody, and have a good night.
Good night.